this video, I will be reading 2 more CreepyPastas for you. But this time, I didn't just go to the recently published tab. I liked the last 2 stories I read a lot, and I realized they were by the same author. So, I just looked up that author on the site, and I'm going to read 2 other stories by them. But the 2 stories that I read were both published recently this year. And it looks like everything else by them on the website was published at least 3 years ago. So, I'm just gonna do, the next 2 recently published stories and hope they're good. I haven't pre-read them or anything, so I have no idea what either of them are really about. But like I said, I loved what I've written from this person so far, so I'm confident these will be good too. So anyway, this first story is called The Night Simon Followed Us, written by Alex McIntosh. A couple of years ago, I walked home from a bar with 2 friends, and we were all loaded drunk. The Irish Newfoundland band brought the house down that night. This was before the pandemic, of course. At Derry's, all you could smell was sweat and sour beer, not an open window to be found in the place. It was the middle of July, and the air conditioning unit had all but fizzled out. Several hops to the resin-coated bar for whatever shots were on offer, and we were all but seeing stars. Anyway, for all the fun we had that night, the 3 of us ended up walking home shortly after 1 a.m., trashed out of our tree, and it was silent outside. No wind, just humid air, mosquitoes, and the faint sound of electricity humming from the street lamps. We were 2 full streets away from the bar, and faintly heard the last of the rattling yellow cabs collecting the final patrons leaving. We were still having fun, the alcohol still chugging us along like trains about to be derailed across the road at any moment. Nights like this were always a good time. I only started not having fun when I was convinced that there was someone following us. Now, normally I couldn't care less. We lived in a small town where everybody kind of knew each other, and we were quite close to home. But every time I turned around to look behind me and converse with Nicole and Luke, I was convinced I could see someone leaning out from behind this old house watching us, and as if their head was tilted to one side. I tried to focus my eyes on the shape, but it was no use. My perception was still whitewashed. Just when I thought I was regaining something, the person had gone. Nicole and Luke carried on walking, stumbling ahead of me. Even while the 2 of them were laughing and talking foreign jargon to each other, Luke must have had some idea something was bothering me. He asked, "Why are you so far behind us? Something got you freaked out?" I answered, "Man, I think there's somebody following us." Nicole smiled and asked, "Is it a baby fox?" "No, behind that old house there was somebody poking their head out from the side of it, just looking at us," I said, my voice giving away a discomforting air. Luke laughed it off. What a weirdo. Who'd do that? They carried on their jaunt facing the road ahead. Just less than a kilometer and we were home. I checked on them walking ahead of me, and some inner thought made me turn around again. As I turned my head around, my peripheral vision picked up a person standing in the middle of the road, less than 30 feet away from us. When I focused my eyes central to the road, the person was gone again. Nicole and Luke were right. I was freaked out, so I began a gentle jog to catch up to them. When I had caught up to their gentle laughter, I stubbed my shoe against the curb and fell nearly flat on my face, with my hand just saving me from injury. This made Luke bust his gut laughing. I mustered a chuckle but couldn't get that feeling out of my head. so scared, man. You're running after us now, Luke yelled at me in merry hysterics. Man, I swear there is someone following us, I said with every bit of solemnity I could pass. I turned around to point and show them where I saw the person, and my heart jumped into my throat. Less than 10 feet away, the dark figure of a tiny naked man stood watching us from the middle of the road. He couldn't have been more than 3 feet tall, but he was wiry, slender, and proportionate. His oddly dark gray skin was matted with pieces of coarse hair, and his eyes locked onto mine. I forced myself up from the ground, and he started to take tiny steps closer to us, his bare feet not making any sound on the hard road. Who the hell are you? I shouted, panicked. Nicole gave me a look as if I was crazy. Her next reaction I just couldn't comprehend at the time. She actually began walking towards it. What are you doing? Get away from it, Nicole. Nicole didn't bat an eyelid and wore an expression as perplexed as mine. What she said next made no sense. I never knew you had a fear of cats, she said gently. With that, she began to pet the man's head, running her fingers through his matted and oily-looking hair and smoothing him down. All I could see was the set of intense and inhumanly oversized burning eyes staring at me, with a wide smile bearing a row of unnaturally large and canine teeth. I could hear my own hyperventilating, and I'm sure they all could too. I was practically frozen. Wow, you really do have a fear of cats, Luke asked, slurring his speech. Nicole stated, This is Simon. Simon loves us, and he follows us home sometimes. In my own head, I didn't know what this smiling thing was. I wasn't seeing a fucking cat, or anything even resembling one. His smile widened impossibly, as if the slit of his mouth began to open from behind his ears. That's when it produced an unnerving, guttural cry. It sounded like that of a newborn baby. Oh, Simon, you love us so much, don't you? Nicole said again, petting his head. I could see dirt and grime covering her hands. They were oily from just touching it. I pressed myself to get up and make a run for it. Maybe I could grab something to at least protect my buddies. Facing the road ahead was still a blur, but I could see another figure was approaching us. Nicole asked, Who's that? It all happened so fast. Footsteps of boots clomping on the pavement and a scuffling sound darting towards us. I heard something click and saw a knife reflected under the street lamps. Give me your money, hand it over, the guy said. I looked at Nicole and was terrified to see Simon rubbing his head against her shoulder, his grin tilted, with a set of sharp, elongated fingers that looked like tarantula legs wrapped around her. You got money? Give it to me, he stated again, nervously. I startled and faced this guy. He was young, drawn in the face, and with desperation plastered over his reactionary expressions. I rifled through my tight jean pocket and looked back to see Luke stroking Simon's hair while also fetching his own cash. Luke volunteered, You can have it all as long as you don't hurt Simon. The guy grasped my wallet with an approving nod before directing at Luke. I don't give a fuck about the cat. I just want your money, he said. I felt like I had nowhere to go. My mind was gone. It was just my own projection. I looked at this thing, Simon, again. This horrendous creature was somehow playing with my mind. Right then, the guy stepped past me with his knife pointed at Luke. He held out his wallet to pass to him, and what happened next, I can't explain. Upon reaching to take Luke's wallet, the guy's wrist was grabbed by both of Simon's hands. I looked right into this guy's eyes at that point, and the look of shock and fear I saw on his face will live with me the rest of my days. His fear was realized as if he knew that exact moment this wasn't some cat, as if his eyes had just been opened. I felt his fear that very moment. I could then see Simon's fingers squeeze and crack every bone in his arm, snapping them until they were protruding through the skin. The scream you could have heard for miles, and lights from house windows immediately began turning on everywhere down the street. The poor guy fell to his knees in absolute agony, then was face to face with Simon in that nasty, playful air. I'll never forget the sounds of Simon's unsettling newborn cries, teamed with ungodly screams of pure pain. In one swift action, Simon pulled the man's arms back and ripped them from the shoulders. The screeching, scratching noise from his throat and the sound of blood hitting the concrete echoed. Luke and Nicole, they just stood out of the way, watching nonchalantly, tuned out to what was really happening. The man was now violently convulsing on the road, and I was too scared to do anything. I watched through my distorted view and just hoped that I wouldn't be next. Looking on for a few moments at his face withered and sweating, breathing out his last bit of life, the shock ripped the blood from his heart and drained out through his stumps all over the road. A few more desperate breaths, and he was dead. When I looked to Luke and Nicole again, Simon was resting his naked body across their knees on the ground, the weight appearing to have no effect on my friends, with pure joy emanating from him. Luke was just stroking Simon's hair. I heard more footsteps rapidly coming from somewhere, and on top of that, alarmed breathing. I just couldn't process any of it right then. "Oh my God, what happened?" one of the neighbors asked. Simon stared at me as if trying to decipher my own next move. I didn't budge. Then Nicole spoke. "I don't understand you, Simon. You're usually so lovely." Alright, that is the end of The Night Simon Followed Us. Hang on, I think that's what it was called. Yeah, The Night Simon Followed Us, written by Alex McIntosh. I hope you enjoyed it. Now let me pause and load up the next story. Alright, I have the next one loaded up. This is Snap, written by Alex McIntosh. Billy slowly facilitated his way in, careful to avoid cutting himself on the broken window. He had gained entry to places similarly and tried his best to clear the shards from the frame using his thick jacket. It was difficult to wipe it all away clean. That was the thing about glass. It seemed to hide well in plain sight. Story of Billy's life. His jacket ensured at least one layer of protection when he slithered his way into the old classroom. He collected a tattered rucksack from Jessie's gloved hands before helping her in. "Are you sure this place doesn't have one of those silent alarms?" she whispered. "No, but then if it does, we won't hear it anyway," Billy replied nonchalantly. He knew vagrancy was bottom of the priority list for any law enforcement team. He also knew the school had been abandoned for at least 5 years since closing. Nobody outside of it would care about a small break-in. Knowing the history of the place, most would sooner wish it were burned to the ground. Sunshine Park Primary School. It sounded so bright and cheerful, but the title was no more than a masquerade. One big, broken dream full of damaged memories and rotten evil. Not closed due to budget cuts or the heavy remediation that was so obviously needed, but rather due to its cemented reputation as one of the most horrifying examples of child abuse in any school system. Abuse that Billy knew all about. Jessie followed him across the large room, concerned at the way he casually squeaked his grimy sneakers on the floor tiles. It was deliberate, a sound to create memories from within. He remembered back to that same sound as a child, planting his soles on the floor, squeaking, running from something he could not remember. The room was cold enough to see the moisture from each breath. There were a few chairs overturned and drained pen markers on the floor. It was a shell of what it once was. The sounds of birch desks scrubbing against the floor and pencils scribbling on exercise books. Heavy breathing from Brother Smith sat staring at each child one after the other. Billy remembered the smell of pipe tobacco on his clothes mixed with a sour body odor. I remember this room, Billy said vaguely. It was after midnight, and the only source of light working in this gargantuan building was being poured in from the street lamps outside. The windows were so large the illumination was more than enough to showcase the massive complex to a certain degree. Where are we going exactly? Jessie was a little unnerved at her boyfriend's calm demeanor. This was followed by an expression that unveiled a sense of vacancy. He was trying to remember things deep-rooted into his subconscious. There's a place in here where we can crash for the night. I used to go there all the time, he replied, entranced. They walked slowly out of the old classroom into a gigantic corridor, their shoes crushing loose drywall chunks with each step. The corridor was lined with open classroom doors on each side of the big swinging double doors at each end. The glow from outside shot lines throughout this space. The ceiling was punched with old tiles, cracked off, and numerous cables hanging down like nooses in the dark. Brown stains of old water created a musty smell to offset the dust from the paint flakes that floated around like lost spirits. A couple of old sliding whiteboards could be seen at the end of one hallway, alongside a wicker wheelchair that ominously faced towards the couple. Billy led on while Jessie fought the urge to choke on the dense particles that filled her throat. There's a little hiding place under the stairs over here, Billy pointed out. Just there, next to the main flight of stairs, a small door that looked like a broom closet rested shut. An off-beige painted door with 3 slits in the top, maybe for air venting from the chemicals. It looked like nothing to Jessie, but to Billy it was like something from a postmodern fairy tale. She could imagine a child playing hide-and-seek there during recess, but for an overnight camp there was no way an adult could work with this. Check this out. Billy pulled the handle open slowly. Jessie could not see anything for darkness. It was like a cave leading into the very fabric of Billy's mind. He reached into his thick plaid pocket and pulled out a small flashlight, clicked its soft trigger, and shone the light into the small doorway. Jessie reacted, surprised. Wow. The small hatch opened inside to a larger area, enough to hunch down without kneeling, and enough headspace to not worry about hitting something. The space wrapped around underneath the entire stairwell and revealed a storage area at the back. Best of all, despite the ruins being mostly empty, this area was still stocked. Aside from a couple bleach bottles rolling around, the shelves contained blankets, towels, napkins, some religious reading material, and containers of bottled water, all unscathed by time and neglect. They must have forgotten to clear it out after the place closed down, Billy smiled. Okay, this is actually pretty cool, Jessie admitted. Billy crouched and went in first, grabbing items as he got further in. It was a C shape, and around the back of the stairwell, a small space that Billy was already familiar with. I used to hide here all the time. I felt safe here. Jessie's baggy eyes carefully observed Billy creating a makeshift sleeping area using the blankets and towels. She had questions of her own. She whispered, "Hun, what do you mean by feeling safe? Who were you hiding from?" Billy sat down and took his shoes off, relieved to rest his aching feet. His stolen and stained sneakers, too sizes too small. He rifled through the various drug paraphernalia in his pocket to find a singular flimsy joint, which he lit right away for a deep, long draw. I used to come to the school when I was a kid. You heard about what they did to the kids in the school? Jesse nodded. Everybody plus their closest friends and family knew about the abuse suffered at the hands of the brothers and sisters. I remember this one man, Brother Locke. He used to terrify me. He used to terrify everyone. He was this big, tall, bald man who used to go around the corridors right here on patrol every time a lesson was in play. He wore this wrinkled black shirt and a dog collar and just looked like a typical priest, except he had this huge brown leather belt he'd remove from his jeans. He paused for a moment. Another repressed memory had stalled him mid-sentence. He took another draw and found his bearings. He'd remove this belt from his jeans and grab it with both hands and just snap it. Jesse listened intently and held Billy's free hand. Snap it. Billy handed the joint over and mimicked the motion. He would snap it between his hands. You could hear the crack of the leather snap down those hallways every lesson time. Snap, snap, snap. The closer he got to your classroom, the louder it got. Jesse shuddered and quickly glanced around the space, taking in every dark crevice. Billy turned off the flashlight. Some of the outside light had reflected into the space from the door being open. It was enough to see about 6 feet in front of them. Billy continued. Snap, snap, snap. Just the sound alone would scare you to death, just knowing he was there. Sounds creepy as hell. Like I said, he used to terrify everyone. I used to see kids going into his office, and he put the fear of God in them. They would leave crying, confused, and I could not understand why. Until it was my turn. One day I was in class, one of the sisters was teaching us about long division or some shit, and I looked to the door, and here was Brother Locke staring right at me. Jessie could see Billy's eyes begin to well up. She knew this must have been his first time out loud telling his account. No interruptions, she passed him back the joint and watched him take another hit. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked so angry with me, almost as if he wanted to kill me. At least, that's what I thought at the time. I didn't realize it was actually much worse than that. I turned my head to the front for a few minutes, just using my peripherals until I saw his shape leave from behind the glass. I was petrified. Next thing, I get called to his office. Jessie caught wind of a crashing sound and jumped at the noise. A piece of the ceiling tile must have struck the floor near them. Billy spotted her unease. That's normal. This whole place is falling apart. There's nobody here. Jessie's arms were folded. You know that for sure. We had to break the window to get in. Nobody has been here for years. This place is rotting. Jessie looked down at her hands, now shaking, as Billy took a big inhalation. The interruption had cleared his mind enough to continue with the story. Anyway, I got called to Brother Locke's office. I walk in and his bookshelves are lined off with thick, leather-bound religious texts. He's facing the wall. He has this little golden tray on his desk to keep his tobacco pipe in. The pipe is laid on the tray, so I figured he must be holding on to something already, something I couldn't see. Billy's lips tremble. I couldn't speak. He turned around, and he's got that belt between his two hands. Snap! Jessie flinched. I ran as fast as I could. I saw the little door open in the corridor, and I hid here, inside, right here. I could hear him pacing up and down the corridor, looking for me, but he never found me. Billy placed the now burned-out joint on the floor. The smoke had filled the air. Every school from then on, I hid right here. Sometimes I'd hide away here for days, and every time I'd hear that snap echoing down the corridor. Jesse saw the terror in his eyes and knew there was more to his experience than that. Either he did not wish to tell her the full story, or maybe his memory buried it so deep it would take a pickaxe to get at it. Her own body ached, but she wanted to listen. Billy's eyes, despite the tears, looked heavy. She implored him to get some sleep. Once his head felt the floor, he settled away to a near coma. Careful to allow him to rest, she soon found the plastic case she needed from within the confines of the rucksack, complete with the needle her dotted arm so craved. Snap! Jessie woke up with sweat running down her back, her neck stiff from the rolled towel her head was sleeping on. It was like a nightmare. She was sure she heard it. Snap! It was faint but real. She did hear it. The echo rang through the hallway just next to them. Jessie's heart was racing. "Hun," she whispered to Billy. Nothing. Billy was dead to the world. She prodded him through the blanket to try to wake him up. "Babe, there's somebody else in the building." Snap! Jessie's breathing had heightened so much she sensed an impending panic attack. She begged her body to remain calm, but the sounds drew closer each time in this old, condemned place. Snap! Jessie's whispers grew louder as her state of alarm intensified. "Babe, please wake up, please." She slapped at his face in desperation, and that's when she noticed it. There was no breathing coming from Billy. "Babe." Jessie clutched the blanket and ripped it away from his body. She screamed. Billy's limbs were contorted in varying directions, his face drooped and resembling an Edvard Munch painting. Sheer fear and terror etched on. Every bone in his body snapped like a chicken wing. Jessie's throat was hoarse. She swung her head round to exit, and that's when she saw it. A figure hunched over, no more than 4 feet away from her. A tall, lumbering thing, fleshy, naked, skeletal in the face, with 2 eyeless holes that somehow locked onto hers. Within its spindly fingers, in both its knobbled hands, a brown leather belt held tightly with purpose. Snap! Alright, that's the end of Snap, written by Alex McIntosh.